Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel, Augusto Argandoña Fine Arts. Anytime in this narrated tutorial, you can click on the subscribe button to subscribe to my channel. If you want to learn about my virtual classes or want to see my paintings, you may do so in my website at aafinearts.com. This tutorial is about how to paint sort of a beach, water and sand areas with watercolors. This particular image is at the north end of, the south end of COQUINA Beach here in the greater Sarasota, Florida area. This particular scene is at the south end of COQUINA Beach, looking towards the entrance to the Gulf of Mexico, and across the water one can see the north end of Longboat Key. So that's what I'm going to paint. There will be some sand, some typical beach type vegetation, and some palm trees. So without much ado, let's go ahead and do the fun part of this tutorial, and that is the painting part. So I'm going to get myself located, situated here in my table, and let's just go ahead and start. I'm going to start with telling you that I do primarily work on 140-pound cold press bright white paper. That's my preference. I don't like to paint on rough finish or hot press. I prefer the cold press. And I use both round brushes and flat brushes, although my preference is the flat brushes. So I'm going to go ahead and start. I'm going to add a little bit of water to the sky area, going over the areas where some of these trees will be. Going right down to the horizon line. Like that. There we are. Make sure this is pretty well covered. And I'm going to make a mixture of manganese blue and cobalt blue. The ideal colors for the way the sky looks here in Florida. And I'm just going to leave some areas white, showing some clouds. And I'm going to cover some areas and leave others. I'm going to bring a little bit more blue here. I'm going to bring some ultramarine into that also. Give us a little different dimension to the color of the sky. Like that. And a little bit more blue ultramarine to this area. Give a little bit of shape to some of those clouds. And towards the horizon, I'm just going to do a kind of wispy type treatment to the sky, like that. And that's about it. I think I'm going to bring this. I don't want to separate them too much. I'm going to bring some of that blue over here too. Create a shape for this little cloud here, like that. Okay. And that's about it. I kind of like this, but I think when I'm going to cover this a little bit more. There, like that. All right, and that's an end for the sky. I'm going to give one light stroke there. There we are. Okay. I think I want to bring a little bit more of the cobalt blue into this area. There we are. Now it's good. So while that's drying, I'm gonna come here and wet this area where this little path is, sand path. And at the same time, I'm gonna add a little bit more water into this area, and there will be some sand and some vegetation here, sawgrass and things like that that grow in the beaches around here. And for that sand, I'm going to make a light mixture of brown matter and cobalt blue. Very light. And I'm going to give it a few strokes here and there. Makes a nice grayish tone. Like that. I'm going to add a little bit of burnt umber to that mixture to bring some of that burnt umber into some of these areas here. The sand in this beach is not quite like Siesta Beach, but it has some color to it, kind of a grayish. I'm going to add a little bit more of those colors. This time I'm going to use ultramarine instead of the cobalt blue. There we are. And bring some of those colors over here. A little bit over here too. And that's about it. I'm going to clean my brush and use a little bit of burnt umber for this section of the sand. It's a little bit of brownish tone. It's not white, but it's very light color, brown. There. I'm going to leave that alone. And I'll let that dry. And while that's drying, I'm going to test the wetness here. It's still a little bit wet, so I'm going to wait a little bit for that. But while I'm waiting, I'm going to get my round brush, large round brush, and start doing some of the vegetation colors. I'm going to use some raw sienna, a little bit of cerulean blue, and a touch of aureolin yellow to that. And bring some of the colors of this vegetation, the sand that will be on the sand. I'm going to leave some areas of the sand showing through this vegetation. This is the base color for these areas. I'm going to bring a little bit more of those colors over here. These are the base colors. And we're going to bring a little bit more cerulean blue into that mixture. Like that. As that paper begins to dry, I'm going to bring more stronger value of the raw sienna. This time I'm going to add a little bit of undersea green to it. And have a little bit different green. Bring some into the sand. The paper is beginning to dry where the sand is, so which is good. I'm gonna bring them like that. A few areas sticking out from the vegetation right into the sand. I'm gonna come down here and add a little bit more of those colors. Start getting the details of the grasses into the path there. Okay, I'm gonna let that dry. Bring more of those colors, a little darker value into this area as well. Here we are. This is going to be much darker because this area will be in the shade. There. I'm also going to bring a little bit of burnt umber into that mixture. I'm going to change brushes with my larger flat brush. I'm start adding some of the shapes of those grasses, tall grasses over here. There. Okay, I'm going to let that dry for now. This should be almost dry. It is. So I'm going to clean my brush and I'm going to do the water. I'm going to use a little bit of cobalt turquoise with manganese blue. And come over here and do the water. The entrance to the Gulf of Mexico. Leave a little bit of the beach in the foreground. I'm going to bring a little bit more of that turquoise color with a touch of aureolin yellow, just very light. There we are. Yeah. There's some sand over here, and there's also some rocks, very small rocks, but they are there, so I'm going to leave those areas kind of white for that. And I'm going to add a little bit more of those colors over here. Okay, now I'm going to bring in some cobalt blue, especially for the distant area towards the horizon. And a couple of strokes here and there, not too much of that cobalt blue, just to give that water a little bit more of a variety in the blue. There we go, like that. And so the water is done. Then what I will do here is I'm gonna get thinking I'm gonna keep that flat brush. There's a little bit of sand in the distance, so I'm gonna add a little bit of water towards the bottom portion of that bank. Like that. There we are. paper dries, I'm going to make a mixture of the colors that I was using before. Raw sienna and the sea green. I'm going to add a little bit of sepia to it, and ultramarine blue. And I'm going to start, when the paper is still damp, I'm going to add this vegetation to the distance, very soft. Barely touching the paper there. Like that. Minimize the color. I'm going to add a little bit of burnt umber into that. Take advantage that the paper is still kind of damp, and bring those colors in there. Leave a little bit of the white at the bottom for the sand. Gonna come a little over here. And I'm gonna increase the value of the green, this time with a little bit of Payne's gray. Yeah. There we are. Like that. Leaving a little bit of the white for that sand there. And a few shapes. I'm going to wet this a little bit more. There we are. Also, I'm going to bring a little bit more of the ultramarine blue with the undersea green. There's some areas here that are going to be a little darker green. There, like that. Also going to bring in some Payne's gray. Some of these greens are a little darker towards the bottom. Just like that. A little bit of sepia into that also, especially over here. Like that. Okay, I'll let that dry. I think what happened here is we got a little bit of a blossom, but we're going to take care of that. Add a little bit more of that blue. Take care of that blossom. I kind of like that blue much better. There we are. A little bit of that over here. Like that. Okay. I'll let that dry. While that's drying, we'll do these palm trees. And for that, I'm going to use some raw sienna with aureole in yellow and the greens that I already have in my palette. I'm going to come here. This is going to be in the shade, so I'm going to make sure that these are a little darker. Raw sienna, aureole, and cerulean blue. Start with an area like that, and go like this as base color. We're going to darken this later. Those palm trees. holding the brush about halfway there, just doing this. Like that. Put more water in my brush. Come over here and go like that. Almost a dry brush effect. Like that. There we are. That's the beginning of those palms. When that's dry, and we get a smaller brush, round brush, get some burnt umber, a little bit of sepia, and ultramarine, and come down here. My paper's dry here now. And come do this trunk for these palms. Like I said, this is going to be in the shade, so I'm going to darken some of these areas. Use a little bit more sepia. Yeah. Get the details of those trunks for these palms, where the fronds have dropped. There's always some residue spikes like that. Get it a little thicker. Make this trunks a little darker also. There we are. Okay. Now go back to the darker greens. Using sepia, paints gray, and on the sea green. We'll put this more in the shade now. There we are. Make it really dark because all of that's in the shade. Without losing some of that light, nice light green in some areas. Like that. A little bit more paints gray. Some burnt umber, make it darker. Come over here and do the same thing. Just a tad more water in my brush and come down here and do the center portion and the darker fronds on these palm trees. Like that. more of the burnt umber, the undersea green, and Payne's gray, because these are going to be really dark, looking towards the light, and these palm trees are going to be darker because of that. Yeah. Okay, so now, because we've done that very dark, also gonna do the vegetation darker. We get my flat brush again and get the same colors. And with the flat brush this time, we're gonna do I'm gonna make sure that this is kind of wet. Like that. Also, going to get some darker effects of the silhouette of these grasses and vegetation, separating the bristles like that. Come over here and do this. These areas are not maintained, so they're kind of rough looking. And that's the way to paint them. Okay. Now I'm going to change brushes again with my round brush. So the bristles are separated like that, and go this way. Come over here, do some of those grasses. There are all these areas in the shade too, so treat the whole thing the same way. Remember what I said of leaving some of the light areas for the sand showing through the grasses. So come over here and do that. There we are. We'll do the same thing over here. Get some of the Rosiena cerulean blue and some of those grasses without doing away with some of the nice base color. Water into this area, kind of soften these areas a little bit more. Don't add too much detail in this corner. Like that. Now this is beginning to take shape. A bit more aureole in yellow for that. Come over here and do some of these shorter grasses. some areas sticking out of the sand, little areas of grasses. Like that. Okay, I'll leave that alone. Now, get a small round brush, get a little bit of brown matter, a little bit of sepia, and some cobalt blue, and do some of these rocks. Like that. Some over here too. Like that. Okay, so now you get this gray that's already in my palette and add some of the patterns of the disturbance on the sand here, disturbance by footprints and so forth. A little less towards the distance, a little bit more in this area, there, like that. All right, so now we'll add to the drama of this shadow area. I'm going to use some burnt umber, quite a bit of burnt umber. Actually, I'm going to change to sepia. Sepia under sea green, quite a bit of it. And Payne's gray, quite a bit of it too. Tone it down really good. Make it dark, very dark. And we come over here and we'll do this, this vegetation, trees that are on this left side here. Like that. Come down and holding the brush this way, I'm going to do some of this detail of the foliage hanging over here. Like that. A little bit more Payne's gray. And come down here. There's some of that over here too. Like that. Okay, now I'm going to do another thing here is I'm going to use some raw umber with Payne's gray, and there's some palm trees there, some palm fronds that are sticking out of this side too. Overlapping some of these palm trees in this area here. Like that. Increase the value of some of this that are in the shade. Bring a little bit more of that detail of the foliage that's hanging. Like that. Now, also, I need to darken this area a little bit more with raw umber and sepia and Payne's gray. Make this a little darker. Like that. Throw that in the shade. Like that. Well, add a few dark areas here too. Not too dark, just to give it a little indication of a few value changes. There, like that. And lastly, with my brush, with my rigger brush, I pick up some sepia mixed with the dark green that I have in my palette, and do some of the branches. There we are. There. And the painting is pretty much finished. So I'm going to remove this tape. I'm going to bring a darker board so you'll be able to appreciate this a little bit more. This top is always hard. There we are. Here comes the dark board. I'll minimize it. And there it is. This nice little path leading to the entrance to the Gulf of Mexico at COQUINA Beach. All of this in the shade, darker vegetations, some palm fronds from a palm tree that's on the left-hand side. These are pretty much in the shade, so that's why they're so dark. All of this is in the shade. All of this is a little bit of sand showing through the vegetation here, some of the grasses, and the beautiful aqua color of the Gulf of Mexico. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed my painting. And please visit my website at aafinearts.com, where you will see information about my virtual classes and a selection of my paintings and prints. Until the next time.